presentations. I would love to welcome on stage our next panelists and speakers. We have an excellent panel today. Oops. And we have definitely somebody online I see now. Welcome. So with us today, we have, I know that Brando Benifei will be a little bit late, but we have Alexandra van Hoefra here, the Digital Minister of the Netherlands. And I know that you have had some of the first experience with AI and bias. Please welcome on stage, Alexandra. Thank you. Please have a seat
Here?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Then we also have Letizia Cayato, the AI and Data Lead for Europe from Accenture. Please, may I welcome you on stage. Online, we have Alexander Suleiman, the Head of Regional Regulatory Affairs from Veriff. Thank you so much for joining us. You were also one of the unicorns that actually helped us to conduct this study, and we are very eager to hear also your feedback on how this worked and what we can do better, and your reaction on the AI Act. And then, last but not least, we have the MEP and the rapporteur from the European Parliament, Brando Benifei, but coming, running in. You'll see him running up and jumping in the chair at a certain point.
Still negotiating.
Yeah, exactly. Still negotiating. Huh? So thank you so much for joining us. And let me just make sure that I can also have eye contact. So, I mean, Alexandra, Honourable Minister. We met also in Estonia and had some of the first discussions. I mean, you were like kind of brought in a little bit also to kind of clean up a bit of a hiccup in Holland on AI. Now the AI, looking at what is coming out of the Parliament now, do we strike that balance between innovation and protection of citizens? Do you think we're going in the right direction? What's your impression as it looks right now?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you very much. And I was supposed to be here last time, but then I just caught COVID and I had to stay home. But thank you for inviting me again. And it's also very interesting to be here now because not only the Parliament is a step further with the negotiations on the AI Act, but also we're seeing every day more and more articles in the newspapers and more announcements by all kinds of companies on AI and especially also on Gen AI. So we're in a very, very, very special moment in time, I would say. To answer your question, of course it is super important that we're going to make sure that the AI Act is going to, be finalized, hopefully this year. Because if we want to have that, you are talking about this balance between innovation and regulation, but I actually believe very much in that these two paths are actually aligned, right? Because if you have clear rules for the market, if you trying to create a bit more of a maturity in the market, that also will help innovation to come about. It's far easier, as I know from my experience in business, to innovate when you know what the boundaries are, what you have to comply with, than if it's all unclear. So I think we are really on the right track. Already, of course, we negotiated with the member states. Now the Parliament has put on top of that some very interesting amendments that we still have to look into detail, but they really look very promising, and hopefully we're now going to create this period where we're going to say, okay, this is what we are looking for, and this is also how we can strive for a situation where the innovators, the companies can come up with new products and services that are actually good for everyone.
Thank you so much. I mean, turning to you, Letizia, I mean, you come from a business perspective, right? Working with clients, they are looking at this AI Act. Do you think it's going to make us more or less competitive? And you can go like short term, long term also. How do you see this evolving?
I definitely agree, actually. I think it is going to make us more competitive. It's going to bring the necessary certainty around the legal framework for people, that people need to really embrace the technology further. Already on the ground, we can see some company being quite hesitant because they don't have this. So it's going to definitely unleash a number of things. What I also see in the AI Act, working with a number of clients, but also, you know, in Accenture in our own ways, is many of the requirements are actually common sense and are things that company already embracing. So the AI Act is a way to enshrine in laws what we currently doing, or that companies are gearing themselves to do. So from that perspective, I think that level of certainty is very important. Very aligned on the alignment with a like-minded partner like the G7 or the US, Europe Technology and Trade Commission. I think very important that we keep that alignment as on the governance element, but as well on the standard element. I think that the big area we need to accelerate is on the standardization. It is going to be crucial, underpinning actually the implementation of the Act. And at the moment, I think it's not going fast enough for the Act to be embodied very promptly after that. So I think the standard is definitely a place that will be part of the change management of embracing the law and making sure company can take it to the next level.
Thank you so much. So Alexander, you are online, and of course we see these unicorns very, very busy with earning money and growing. So thank you for your time here today, and thank you for all your efforts also in participation of the sandboxing exercise. How do you think that this will affect your business? Goods or bads?
Hi, Cecilia, and hi to everyone. So I hope I can be heard and seen. So I only see the three of you, so thank you. So first, maybe a couple of words about Veriff, just as a background, right? So Veriff is an Estonian-founded but internationally operating AI-powered identity verification solutions company. So we are headquartered in Estonia, but we do have locations also in the UK, Spain, and the US. So we do have a very strong presence in the US market, and a large chunk of our revenue comes from the US. So I would like to think that we're a very kind of export-driven company. So to start off, I think, you know, we are very pro-regulation in that sense, and I do agree with what has been said before, that the pro-innovation approach and addressing the societal and the fundamental rights-driven concerns are not mutually exclusive. I think they're very inclusive in that sense, and there is a way to address both. So on the secondly, on a kind of a general risk level logic that has been put forward by the EU Commission, now supplemented by the Parliament, I think that approach is also right. As different technologies and different use cases do present different risks. So I think the spearhead, I think where it's directed, I think that's very correct. So thirdly, just going more into practical terms, so there will be definitely direct and indirect effects deriving from the AI Act, and you can list those as kind of administrative, technological, and monetary effects. So first, of course, there is, you know, just as a company, there's a question whether we will be a high-risk provider or not. So based on the Parliament's draft, I think there's still a fair share of uncertainty, and in the end, we have to establish that clarity for ourselves. So in case we would be a high-risk provider, I think there will be a significant lift to ensure compliance, but also additional processes and safeguards for future product development. So the second important point is also that we are operating in a B2B space. So we are not a B2C company, but we do sell to other businesses. So we're actually part of the bigger AI and tech ecosystem and the value chain, So the reality is that products and services are being put into the market by being dependent on service providers and being dependent on vendors. So there is definitely going to be kind of a value chain effect that would need to be considered. In practical terms, it probably means that we will have to put just more effort into our vendor assessment processes and reassessment processes, because we want to make sure that the companies with whom we partner are reliable and they are the right partners, and they are also trusted by actually the companies to whom we actually sell our services to. So the last point that I'm going to address, and that was also brought forward, is that as many other innovative EU-based companies, we are operating across the world. So that means that regulatory fragmentation comes with a high cost. So we would support as much alignment as possible across the main export markets of the EU companies. So that means that the taxonomy and kind of the principal level approaches should align at least between the UK, US, and the EU, so that the EU companies are actually able to win internationally.
Thank you so much.
Do you mind can you hear me? Can we go to the first poll, actually? We have a poll for the audience.
Yes, of course.
Okay. So, whilst that loads in a second, I just want to remind everyone in the room, but also watching online, that you can ask questions. I will ask them to Cecilia at the end of the session. So, the first poll, if we can just get that up, is related to a question that you asked both panelists at the beginning. Okay, will the AI Act give companies in Europe a competitive advantage globally? So we asked our panelists, let's see what the audience think as well. And whilst we're just getting the answer on that, maybe I'll pass back to you, Cecilia.
Interesting.
It's already appearing on screen, actually.
Yeah, it is. No, right now it's a big no, right? Now it's getting closer to yes. Okay, let's see. You're going to do a countdown?
Yeah, let's close it in 5, 4, oh, it's gone. But I think what we had, it's gone, but what we had was 60% no, 40% yes. So split, but slight edging towards no. Okay.
Okay, and maybe I put in a question out there for you, so you can also get your questions to Chris. Why? Why does it not? Concretely, why does this make us less competitive for the ones who said no? Could be very interesting to have some feedback. Now, jumping back to the questions, Alexandra, you, as I said, you had a bit of a hiccup in public sector on AI with some biases in algorithms, etc. And it's always kind of it's always been like, well, the companies and they need to be regulated for this, but here we actually have public sector in scope.
Exactly.
And do you think there is a particular kind of tension that needs to be put on public sector regarding AI, the use of AI, and how do you see that?
Well, basically, I believe we need to set the example, right? So if we are negotiating an AI Act, then definitely also governments need to apply it. Because this means that we have to be very transparent, that we have to show what kind of AI we're using. Also in terms of when we make decisions, for instance, if you apply for a subsidy, that it's clear whether that decision was made by AI or by human or by, a human supported by AI. All these kinds of things, I believe, need to be very transparent. What we are basically doing right now, we made a register for algorithms that the government is using in all kinds of sectors, so in the social domain, in taxes and everything. We are showing to the people that are using the services whether or not decisions are made by AI, but also how this AI tool works. So it's all very transparent. But that also means, of course, that if we are creating the AI ourselves, we can do it in the way that we do it. But usually also governments buy tools or have them created for them. And then, of course, it's super important that also the companies that we buy that from are applying to the basic rules about transparency and privacy and non-bias and so on and so forth. So that is something that works. And that was also something that Alexander was saying, he is in a B2B chain. So also in that B2B chain, you have to be sure that if you buy something from another company, that you're having, that they also use the standard. So that is for me very important. So we have the register. We also have our present GDPR auditing or regulator is also now also the algorithm regulator, so we can also check whether it's not only registered but used in the right way. And hopefully that's going to help, because yes, when we got into this super serious problem, we had about 30,000 people being in, getting into very big trouble. So yeah, this really showed that it's important to work on it.
Yeah. I mean, just curiosity, what was the biggest learning from that process? I mean, what was the kind of what have you seen change? I mean, apart from you have a register, is it a cultural thing also? Is it, how is your readiness improved?
Well, I think, and that's happening even more today with Gen AI coming about. But what it did to the government in the Netherlands was basically, because we're using AI tools everywhere, not very complicated necessarily, but AI tools. And we got, first of all, aware of the fact of two things I think are important. One is, of course, that if you don't look at it, if you're just using it, if you don't train it right, if you just let it sit there, then it can go very wrong. So that is something that is super important. The other thing is also that when we make laws, usually we stop at kind of high level, and then if you make an AI tool to make that, to implement that law, for instance in social security or something like that, or in risk assessment, it's usually the people that produce or that create the AI, that program it, make decisions that are, can have huge implications for human rights, for, non-discrimination, and so on and so forth. So it's also gave us the insight we need to check very clearly when we, make a law into an AI or create, that we follow up on how it's being built. So those two lessons, I would say, and then next to that, always keep on using it, checking it, make it open and transparent, so science and NGOs can look into what we're doing.
Thank you so much. So Letitia, turning to you, I mean, you work with all the companies that are now facing the new era of ChatGPT, right? In good and bad way, I guess, right? So how do you see the reaction to ChatGPT? What does it mean for the companies that we work with?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, ChatGPT has been an awakening, I think, for a lot of people of the potential and the world of possibility. I think there's a number, meaning I've been 25 years in the IT industry, went through, the beginning of internet, and I haven't seen that level of excitement and actually wanting to understand and put things in place since the internet. I think it is a big moment, and I think, the democratization of ChatGPT, the fact that everybody can go and sense and feel it, has made, the world really realize the potential around it. Now there's a lot of things that are not yet well understood, but I think a number of companies, were in the first early weeks on trying to understand what it is. Still, a number of people or conversation I have is like talk about ChatGPT, but actually large language model is much more complex technology in the background. There's the open source, there's a number of providers that are on premise. Some of it is done on public data on the internet like ChatGPT, but some of the other one, you can control the data, you feed it in, and you can have it in your environment with the right bed-on basis. And as you were saying before, a number of people are excited to try because it's democratized. And that trying is great because we're in a learning phase, but it can be dangerous. So as we understand collectively what those kind of technology, large language model can bring to company, it's very important to keep in mind that it needs to be done in a controlled way as well, especially if you want to take it all the way up to production. And the risk framework is already giving us some some possibility. I am super excited about the potential of generative AI, meaning I'm in conversational AI for 6-7 years. It's quite mind-blowing. I'm really excited around multimodality, for instance, of data in health. You know, how do you bring radiology data, you know, blood data, text data on the medical space to start looking at patient in a 360, you know, bringing all that. But also, how do you generate data for inclusive drug testing, for instance? You know, drug testing typically is done on white male because of a number of reasons, but you can start generating data to actually do more inclusive drug testing. So the potential, you know, I was using health as an example because I think there's some other session later on it. But the potential of using that technology is very high. It needs to be done in the right way.
Thank you so much, and welcome to the rapporteur himself.
Thank you. Still blocked in the parliament, but I managed.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for taking the time. We know that you are very busy, and are you ready for the first question?
Ready.
Okay. Good. So, I mean, first of all, congratulations. You've reached a compromise. You're now ready to go into the last phase of trilogues. What will be the key things that you will be discussing in trilogues?
In fact, we still need in 2 weeks' time to have the final vote in plenary, but we think it will be quite okay. There are maybe one topic for those who followed that there is still a little debate in the groups. It happened already in the voting committee, which is the real-time biometric identification. But on the general text, really completely fine, and we are aligned, and we have a large majority. This, I think, is quite important that we are going to the trilogues with a strong backing from the parliament. So I think I told already. Even today, people from the council, that we will expect a negotiation where there is respect for the positions that the parliament has adopted, even though we know that there are issues where there is some differentiation between us and the council, and we will need to negotiate toughly, because we think they are very important. So the differences, we will need to find a way to come to a common ground. I can mention very briefly which are the bans. I mentioned the RBI, so the degree of the ban on the real-time and non-real-time biometric identification, the issue of the predictive policing, the issue of the emotion recognition. We ban that in workplaces and in schools, which is something I know will be a matter of debate. Also, we introduce a fundamental rights impact assessment for the deployers, so an extra layer of protection for citizens closer to when the actual system will be used, because as you know, here everyone knows that the regulation, the rules are based mainly on and largely on those that develop the AI systems. But we also want the deployers to do their part when we look at the impact concretely on fundamental rights. Then I see a topic where we have, and I conclude on this, we have differences with the governments, with the council, but also we see that the council position was not so articulated. So we think we can, in fact, find a common ground more easily, which is the issue of foundation models and generative AI. Because the parliament has written some rules on that were not there. The council position was more like delegating to commission, in fact. We have articulated more clear obligations for foundation models and generative AI. And we hope that we can use this as a base for a final position and not have too much difference with the governments. I'm more optimistic about this less optimistic about the convergence, which will be more difficult on the first aspects I mentioned. Thank you.
So thank you so much. Very, very interesting. Maybe can I do a follow-up question right away?
Yes.
So I mean,
Like a blue card in the
so I mean, ChatGPT like just fell in from the sky in the middle of the negotiation. What did that mean? I mean, how did you? It will keep on coming, right? It will be like all the time new AI, new rules, new uses. How do we? I mean, what does it mean for the kind of regulation that we're doing now?
Well, first of all, we try to have a regulation that can be updated more flexibly. We will continue working on that. And also, the idea of focusing on the use cases rather than on the technology used, I think, will help us be more flexible in adapting to technological changes. In fact, the reason why we had to act on the foundation models and generative AI is more linked to the fact that the whole of the regulation is based on the foreseen use cases. In this aspect of the foundation models, we in fact derogate a bit to this principle because we put some obligations on a general model that has not a specific use case. So, I mean, in general, this focus on the use cases, I think, will provide enough flexibility for new technologies that will be developed. And at the same time, these rules for foundation models and generative AI will cover the general purpose AI, at least in their more complicated aspects, and we have treated on that, and that was lacking a bit in the original proposal of the Commission. Also, I think it will be very important that the AI office with the AI supervisory authorities at national level will build a common culture, will build a way of working together. I think it will be very important because we cannot go on with fragmentation. Sorry, this is a more general political issue. How can Europe compete with China and US if we are so divided? Because we are not united. They are united. We are divided. And we need to be more united if we want to be more competitive. Let's say this clearly. At least this is what I think. It's unrealistic to be divided. It's a realist political position to be more united. And we should tell this to our citizens. This applies to many topics, but also to AI, in my view.
And it does. I think it is super important also that you, you know, the mentioning of the topics that the Parliament added to the proposal, and especially on this generative AI, because yes, we talked about it on the 6th of December, and it was on the 30th of November, I think, that ChatGPT came about. So, you know, it wasn't as far as it is. So to get to talk together about how we are going to manage this is something that is super important, because we see different things coming up today, basically every day. What I like very much also about the idea of having that debate is that, you know, when we're looking now at this generative AI, we see these two sides. Well, you were talking about all the beautiful things that it can do, and it will be super disruptive anyway. The other way is also that and then that's also something that we discussed, is also that it can go very wrong. So the regulation coming into place sooner rather than later, and as united as we can, is super important, because we do not want the bad things happening that can be created if you even talk to the people that are producing these generative AI models and systems. Yeah.
No, thank you. Very good point. And let's talk to one of the people who are actually making this these AI systems, and who are facing this. You know, how long time will it take? How much will it cost? Are we ready? So, and as I said before, I mean, we've done the sandboxing exercise. We've interviewed, you know, scale-ups to see how does it work? Do they understand? Can it be implemented? So, being a part of this sandboxing exercise, Alexander, I mean, it's the first time that this word sandboxing is in a regulation, and we did a pre-regulatory sandbox, right? What was the benefits? What were the learnings from and the outcomes of of a pre-regulatory sandbox like this, and has it somehow kind of brought into a situation that you were not before?
Yes, indeed, and actually this was also our first time being part of a so-called policy or a pre-regulatory sandbox, and I think it was definitely a very valuable and useful experience. And I think it's kind of a key question for SMEs and scale-up startups is how to make themselves heard in the right place and in the right time, and also to be engaged. Because actually the amount of economic value and innovation created by such companies is actually very important for the economy. So we were keeping our eye on the AI Act, but the process itself definitely allowed us to be engaged on another level and to familiarize ourselves more. So I think it definitely had a positive effect. We were not the total kind of a white page before, so I think it kind of helped to add more color and more depth into the regulation. So I think and I do hope that in the future there are going to be opportunities to analyze, think along, and actually contribute to the future legislation in the same manner as we did for the AI Act. So I think it was a very good exercise, and also a valuable exercise for the non-legal people in our company.
Yeah. So maybe just asking, I mean, if I asked you now, are you in high risk or non-high risk, would you understand already right now, as the text is now, where you would be, and how you were more or less to implement this?
To be totally frank, I think it's not fully clear whether we're high risk or not currently. So we are offering kind of a one-to-one biometric matching. So we don't kind of offer any kind of biometric products for, I don't know, for surveillance in public spaces, right? So I think we are the type of company who would really, need to analyze where we fall once there is legislative clarity. So I think that, in case you would ask me a year from now, or maybe in the beginning of 2024, then I think I would have a more clear answer. But I think right now we're still in a position where we need to pay attention to where the act is leading and to just be engaged.
Thank you so much. So Alexandra, jumping to you. We know that you are in the midst of looking at sandboxing, right?
Yes.
And one of the things that Digital Europe has said is like these companies are global. They don't really need a sandbox in each country, maybe regional, maybe do 5 in Europe or something like this. Will Holland be a hub for also non-Dutch companies to come and test their AI with your sandbox? And what's the idea? What's the progress on this side?
Well, the idea is we haven't fixed on how we're going to do it exactly, but one thing that I find very important is, of course, that we have sandboxes that are as varied as possible, that are not only just looking at different kinds of AI models, but basically also really check whether the regulation works. And also, so regulators should be involved in that as well, I would believe. But I'd be very happy to have not 27 per country or whatever, but something that works a bit more together, and especially also make sure that what we learn from country to country is distributed, because there's also the point that Bruno was making is that it is really important that we try to make the regulation, as unified as we can. My experience when I was still working in a company was when GDPR came about. Well, first of all, it was very hard for me to get an answer to the question, what do I actually have to do as a company? I was working for a public transport company. So, in order to be compliant, I wanted to be compliant, but I had no idea what I had to do. And the other thing would be, I think, is that you don't want it to be different from country to country. So working on that, if sandboxing also helps to clear up the regulation, to make very clear for instance, a company like Alexander, I am high risk or not, this is how I need to comply, help companies, also smaller ones, to be compliant, that is going to be one of our challenges, because you need a great law, you need a great act, but in order to make it work, it also needs to be implemented in the smoothest way possible. For all those companies, and I believe the bigger majority, the largest majority of companies really want to be compliant. So for them, we need to support them.
Thank you so much. Laetitia, you represent and work with many companies. What do they need now? What do they need to implement this?
Well, you know, we were having some of those conversations. The AI Act obviously is coming, hopefully, to bear at the end of this year. But there's still quite a few things like the standards, those conforming bodies, you know, like, so the mechanics on how it's going to land and support some of the organization, you know, it's going to be very important to have it follow in very short order. So we can, you know, people can understand how this is kind of, you know, becoming applicable. Now, what I said before is many of the requirements of the AI Act are common sense, great common sense, where big organizations that have the right talent and the right organization have a number of those things in place, yeah? So I don't think it will be a huge undertake if we have the conforming bodies, the standards clear, as we embrace it in that 2-year period.
So, you know, you see the study, we have done this pre-regulatory sandbox, and I'm sure that you've studied it all night, right? No, but is that something that is like inspiring for you as a policymaker, that you have the ability of also in the middle of the process to like make a halt and say like, okay, let's bring in like 10 or 20 companies and let's see if it works, right? Let's try this on companies that are actually in the market right now in Europe.
I think in general we try to express an opinion after having studied the issues, but in general we can say that having a pre-regulatory activity also in this area, in this kind of experimentation with the sandboxes. But I could also add to what has been discussed in these hours on the TTC, on a code of conduct for the generative AI and such. In general, I think it's important because we will have, and maybe we will continue also on this discussing with the Council. We will have to discuss also about that. We will have some time before the regulation, even after it's approved, it becomes actual applicable law. It has a time of transition. So if we, in the meantime, experiment, thanks to the also initiative of businesses and of agreements, for the other example I made of countries considering that, I didn't delve into that earlier when I spoke earlier, but we have tried to build a regulation that can talk with the rest of the world. The definition we have used for the AI systems is the OECD definition, and we have intense, we had and we are still having an intense regulatory dialogue with other countries. I was in Japan a few weeks ago. I will be in Washington next week. We are trying to see how we can build a common language, even if we have differences in what kind of requirements we will put in place. But we would hope, for example, that the idea of the risk-based assessment could be a common language among different systems.
And we're also working with the Council of Europe, right? So that is also very interesting because they're making a treaty which is on AI, and the idea is that we are going to make it as aligned as possible with the EU Act, hopefully in order also to engage more companies, not only companies but countries into this system, which is going to be very, very important.
So Chris, do we have some questions or results from the audience?
We do. And one of them is the most voted is a kind of response to your challenge. So why is it, you said, why are you voting that the AI Act is not going to make people more competitive? They said, well, GDPR didn't make EU companies more competitive. why would the AI Act be different? So maybe that's something that the panelists could comment on as well. And we mentioned the international angle that was also asked. I also want to ask Minister Van Huffelen, this concept of the fundamental rights impact assessment. This came from Joanna. Thank you for your question. Introduced by the Parliament. Industry is a little wary of how that might be implemented. What is the Dutch view on this as well? So GDPR and then on the fundamental rights impact assessment. Yeah.
So maybe take two questions. Maybe you can start with the impact assessment.
Yeah.
What's the Dutch view on that? And maybe we can move to you on the GDPR. Why this? Why should this make us more competitive? Please, go ahead.
So I find it super important, and we already made an assessment. We made an impact assessment on human rights, a standard that is being developed and that we're already using as a government when we're applying AI. It's basically also why we very much lobbied during the negotiations in the council for this. I find it very important to have this assessment in place because it basically from the producers of AI, but now also from the people that are using it, they have to do that first. And basically you can already do it. So we as a government are already doing it. We're putting it in place on Facebook usage of our own, our own Facebook pages. Not only the GDPR assessment, but also the human rights impact assessment, and that works very well. The idea is that we have to look, because you said one of the things that you added in the Parliament was to make sure that this assessment is also made by the people using or applying AI. We need to figure out how that works, because it might be you don't want to do it twice, the same thing. It has to be very much also on how the user is going to use the tool or the product. So we have to figure out how that is going to work further. But the idea of it works very well.
Thank you so much. So, Rando, so we just had our internal event before, and we looked at some of the numbers. 4 out of 5 European CEOs says that we are much less competitive than, and it's declining, fast declining. We see that 60% of the CEOs want to move their investments, innovative investments, to North America, and 30% to non-China EU. So why would this make us so fantastically more? I mean, it seems that we have some other things, right? Are we also enabling at the same time, or are we only protecting? I mean, so why would this make us more competitive?
You mean the AI Act in general?
Yeah.
Well, I think it will make us more competitive because we have a specific issue more strongly in Europe than in other parts of the world, not just in Europe, but here particularly. That is the need to build trust because of the high degree of protection of consumers we are used to. And so people should feel that they can use our systems feeling protected. Otherwise, I suspect that with some scandal we can hinder trust, and we can create a problem in our societies with the impact of AI. It could become also very divisive in political terms. I think instead that we need to build cohesion, we need to build understanding, and so we need also to reduce, mitigate risks ex ante, not just ex post with the damage already there. We know the stories, we know the various already examples that we had also in Europe of problems with algorithm in public context, for example, but not only. And so I think that we should use our economic power to promote a system that it should not be too cumbersome. It should select correctly what should be more regulated and what should be let more free in terms of use cases of AI. But in this way, we can also have our model that I think can have a dialogue with the rest of the world. But I insist, as I said earlier, that it cannot be just rules. We need to build infrastructure, we need to build investment, we need to have firepower, in brackets, and to do that we need to be more united in working on AI projects at EU level.
Thank you so much. So we are coming to an end on this panel, and I'm going to ask Alexander. Alexander, you are one of the receivers here. So let me ask you for a very short word on what would be your biggest advice for the policymakers and the countries that are now receiving all this regulation. What would be your one thing? Please remember to.
Well, my one thing would be, of course, to make sure that we have this AI Act in place as soon as possible. And the second thing, as I am now have to implement it, is that we have to work together in Europe to make sure that it's going to be as implementable as possible, as soon as possible. Because I also really find it very important that, you know, we don't only make the rules, but we're definitely going to make sure that they are going to be applied. And and on the innovation point, I'm very much with Brando, because I believe that it's super important that we make sure that we keep our innovation powers, you know, going and flowing, but within the context that we have safe products and services for our people, because that's basically what it is. If you buy a jar of peanut butter in the supermarket, you want it to be safe. You want to make sure that it's okay. And this is also applicable to AI, and it's going to be even more applicable to all these generative AI systems that are going to be even more disruptive.
So let's hear Alexander. Are you still online? I don't see your picture here anymore, but I think you are still online.
Yes,
yeah, he's still online. Okay. So Alexander, you are out there, and now you are gonna hopefully, you know, find a post-regulatory sandbox also. I mean, from your side, receiving all this, you know, what would be the one thing that you would say, dear policymakers, remember me, remember us. We are the ones who's supposed to be more competitive in 5 years, you know, and benefit from this, or even in 2 years. What would be your one, please remember to?
Yes, it's very difficult to only limit myself to one, but I will then take 1.5. So it would be probably pro-innovation and competitiveness. So because we want companies to be able to export also outside of the EU, and I think with the regulation there also comes an opportunity, and there is opportunity to Europe actually to also lead internationally in this space, in this regulatory space. So let's kind of keep that competitive edge, or let's increase the competitive edge of the European companies, but let's also not forget that the EU is made up of 27 member states, which are very different. So let's also try to address the regional fragmentation inside the EU, so that companies from smaller member states are actually operating on the same level than companies coming from the bigger member states.
Thank you so much. With that, let me try to summarize a little bit, right? It's not that, it sounds that we all agree that it's a pretty good idea to regulate. The devil is in the detail. We know that we might have more high risk coming out of the parliament than we expected from the first proposals. It's now walking into, you know, entering the phases of trialogues. One thing that everybody highlights is very important, that to make us more competitive, okay, trust is one thing, but it needs to work in praxis. It needs to be implementable and not slow companies down. And that will be the first test on how we do this. Are we able to actually do competitive, innovative, regulatory initiatives, implement them in a way that speeds us up? And then I want to remind one thing. Unfortunately, one of the things that we are not discussing on EU level is critical skills for society. It is still national level, and I would like to argue one thing. Remember, AI and cyber are international critical resilience skills for the whole society across Europe. And regulatory efforts protects, but educational efforts enables. And I'm a big believer in the enlightened democracy, that this initiative cannot go without doubling the effort of making secondary schools children having an education and understanding of what they are facing in the future, not only using it, but creating the next generation of AI. So with that, thank you so much, Brando. Thank you, Letizia. Thank you, Alexandra. And thank you, Alexander, online, for a great panel and the insight that you have given of us all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.